Hello, my name is Jean Salac, and I'm a PhD student at the University of Chicago's Canon Lab. And on behalf of my co-authors, I'll be presenting our paper, Exploring Student Behavior Using the TIPP SEE Learning Strategy. If you have any questions, feel free to tweet me at @Salac. Many initiatives worldwide are increasing access to computer science instruction for a variety of students, including those who may not have been exposed to computer science otherwise. And it is important that our instruction supports all learners. One way to do this is through learning strategies that support metacognition and self-regulation. Metacognitive strategies make explicit to all students the processes that successful learners use. One such learning strategy is TIPP SEE, designed to scaffold student learning from example Scratch projects. The first half, TIPP, guides students in previewing different aspects of a new Scratch project before looking at any code. They first read the title, instructions, and the purpose of the project to focus their attention on what they will be learning during this activity. The extra P is play, in which they run the code with very deliberate observations of the events and actions that occur. The second half, C, provides a roadmap for finding code in the Scratch interface by clicking on the sprites and looking at the events. And this helps students connect the actions they observe to the code that they see. The last E is explore, in which they are taught how to make changes to the code to learn how a particular block works, and this proceduralizes deliberate tinkering. A prior study showed significantly stronger performance from students who used the TIPP SEE learning strategy. This graph shows the performance on questions related to loops, and student scores are normalized to the TIPP SEE group. The left bars are the control group, and the right bars are the TIPP SEE group. Asterisks indicate a statistically significant difference in performance between the two groups. Fourth grade students using TIPP SEE outperform control students in nearly every loop question. In this study, we wanted to understand why such dramatic performance differences occurred. To that end, we analyzed student Scratch projects and TIPP SEE worksheets to better understand the behaviors of the control and TIPP SEE students. Spoiler alert, we found that while students using TIPP SEE behaved in a way that we believed would lead to more success, no individual actions directly explain the results. And this suggests that the value of TIPP SEE may lie in cognitive processes not directly observable, just like most metacognitive strategies. Now, let's take a closer look at these student actions. So for each Scratch project, students had to complete certain requirements, some to demonstrate a concept, some to encourage creativity. This graph shows the completion rate of requirements for each project. Project names are on the x-axis, and the percentage of requirements is on the y-axis. Control students are on the left, and the TIPP SEE students are on the right. Projects where the completion rate was statistically significantly higher for the TIPP SEE students are marked with an asterisk. TIPP SEE students frequently completed the same or more requirements than control students. On the rare occasion where more control students completed a requirement, the requirement did not require much coding, such as changing a sprite. Now let's focus on 3 projects as examples. One project students completed is called the Events Ofrenda, and this project was inspired by the Mexican holiday Day of the Dead. And students were presented with 3 ancestors as sprites on the Ofrenda. Students were prompted to modify the project by adding their own family members and making them interactive. There were 2 requirements that required coding: making their sprites speak and making them interactive. The last requirement was to change the sprite's costume. To better understand student behavior, we distinguish between fulfilling a requirement on one sprite, where students only practice the skill once, and on all sprites, where students practiced multiple times and finished the task. On this graph, we have the percentage of students on the y-axis And on the x-axis, we have the requirements separated by TIPP SEE and control. The top portion of each bar represents students who only completed the requirement for one sprite, and the bottom portion represents students who completed the requirement for all sprites. On the whole, TIPP SEE students completed more requirements on one and all of the sprites. And this suggests that these students better demonstrated their ability to apply their knowledge of events and were more thorough in their work when following the TIPP SEE strategy. Another project students had was called the 5-block challenge. And this project prompts students to create a project using only 5 blocks. When this sprite clicked, when green flag clicked, the wait block, the say block, and the glide block. The goal of this project was to encourage students to build with blocks that they had never been explicitly taught, and to encourage students to build longer scripts with more action blocks, as opposed to a lot of scripts with only one action block. On this graph, we have the distributions of the average and maximum script length for each student's 5-block challenge, with the control students on the left and the TIPP SEE students on the right. We found that TIPP SEE students created longer scripts on average and had a higher maximum script length, though the maximum script length difference was not statistically significant. And on this graph, we have the different block types used by TIPP SEE and control students, with control on the left and TIPP SEE on the right. The best case would be a bar of all blue, meaning that all students used all 5 required blocks. A majority of TIPP SEE students used 4 to 5 of the required blocks, while a majority of the control students used only 2 to 3 of the required blocks, suggesting that TIPP SEE students were better able to create artifacts in the context of sequence. The last project we will focus on is called Parallel Path. And in this project, students were presented with 2 sprites with either sequential or parallel actions depending on the number that they pressed. Students were then asked to modify the project so that when a mouse was clicked, each individual sprite would have within sprite parallelism, or each sprite would do 2 actions in parallel. And when the number 9 key was pressed, there would be parallelism across sprites, or 2 sprites doing a single action in parallel. On this graph, we have the completion rate of each requirement for a parallel path, with the control students on the left and TIPP SEE on the right. Less than 25% of control students completed any single requirement, while almost 75% of TIPP SEE students completed one requirement. More than half of them completed all their requirements. And this is especially noteworthy as student struggles with the concept of parallelism are very well documented from the K-12 to the university level. Now let's take a look at other actions TIPP SEE students did, like their worksheets. TIPP SEE worksheets were only completed by treatment students. Control students had worksheets too, but did not have TIPP SEE questions to guide their exploration. There are 3 categories of worksheet questions. The first is observe questions, where students record their observations after running the project. The second is predict questions, where students look at code and predict which blocks caused which actions they observed. And the third is explore questions, where students change the code and record what happened. Now on this graph, we have the question type on the x-axis and the percentage of students on the y-axis. We categorize student responses into no sheet, which means we didn't receive a worksheet from the student at all, blank, which means we received a worksheet, but the student did not answer the question, incorrect, where students answered the question incorrectly, and correct, where students answered correctly. We see that a majority of students completed and correctly answered observe and predict questions, but explore questions were largely left blank. It's unclear why these questions were left blank. It may be because they were too difficult, or they were not routine for students as they weren't on all worksheets, and this would require further research. Okay, we saw a lot of behaviors that were different between control and TIPP SEE students as a whole, but are there any correlations between those specific positive behaviors and assessment performance? Surprisingly, hardly at all. There were very few correlations between project completeness, worksheet correctness, and assessment performance. The distribution of worksheet correctness and project completion broadly fell into two categories. Either scattered all over the place, which was characteristic of earlier projects, or concentrated on the right half of the plot, but with no other patterns beyond that, and this was more characteristic of later projects in the curriculum. And as for any relationship with the assessment questions, those were rare, and any correlations that did exist were weak. So, while we found significant differences in the behaviors between TIPP SEE and control students, these behaviors were not directly correlated to their performance or with each other. And this suggests that the value of TIPP SEE may lie in cognitive processes not immediately visible through student work. With that, we invite further research into learning strategies that support metacognition and self-regulation in computing. These strategies are crucial to supporting a variety of learners who are getting access to computer science instruction worldwide. That wraps up my talk. Feel free to tweet me with any questions, or you can reach out to us with our emails on the screen.